Hello everyone, let's go ahead and polish up another event, and that is when we are saving our games. We're currently not saving any sound effects because sound effects are usually play once and then they're done, so there's no need in reloading them. That's true in all cases except for looping sound effects. So if we go ahead and start a new game, and then we just go ahead and get past this initial section over into where they enter the village, now you can hear that there is a sound effect playing of that radio static. So if I choose to save to this save file, I'm going to go back home, and I'm going to load, and I'm going to load that one. And I get everything except for the sound effect, because it's not saved to file. So we need to go ahead and save that as well. That way, if we have any looping sounds, they will resume once we restart the novel. So we're going to handle this inside of the audio manager. Well, part of it anyway. We need to make sure that we store the file path for the sound effects. And we don't want to create a separate instance or keep track of classes with more information. We can just simply replace the file name that goes into the name of the object with the file path instead. So we just need to make sure that we have a file path, no matter what, available to us. Even if we're passing in just an audio clip, let's also make sure that we have a string for the file path, which defaults to nothing. Okay, so that will be for if we're passing in an audio clip. Now, if we're passing in the file path and we're loading the clip dynamically, then let's go ahead and make sure that we just throw in the file path as the final parameter. Okay, so when we create this thing, and we have the audio clip we're using, we're going to create a new game object and rename it in this format, using the SFX name format and just injecting the clip's name. Instead of injecting the clip's name, let's inject the file path, but only if we have a file path. So if file path is not equal to a string.empty, then we can go ahead and set it to a particular name. So let's make a string, and this will be file name equals, we'll just go with clip.name. Clip.name by default. And if file path is not equal to empty, then file name equals file path instead. And so instead of passing in clip.name, we'll pass in file name. So that way we'll either get the name of the audio clip, which could be interpreted as being directly in the resources folder, or we can get it inside of the file path that has been provided to us. So instead of just storing the name as the sound effect, we're going to store the file path. Now let's go to the database extension for our audio, where we run the play sound effects command. If we go to play sound effect, then we get the audio clip by loading it from resources, but so we can keep that file path, let's extract that into string file path, or string full, let's do string resources path equals, and we'll go ahead and grab the actual resources path right here. So then we'll go ahead and load it from resources path, and when we play the sound effect, we're going to make sure that we specify that the file path equals the resources path. Doing it this way, so just in case we want to load audio outside of the default sound effects folder, we can do that by using the home directory symbol, which if we look at file paths, we have the home directory symbol right here. So if we precede anything by the tilde and the /, then we can go to the root of the resources folder without being restricted to some other location. Which means as we run play sound effects radio static, it's going to look at the default SFX folder. But I've also added another sound effect called play SFX with the tilde / audio church bells far. So that way it will play one from a different folder, not just the sound effects. We should be able to load sound effects from anywhere as long as it's in resources, and we should be able to recall it just the same in our save files. And now we can see that the sound effects created for them, they both contain the full path inside of resources for the audio file. this one being in the root audio folder, and radio static being in the SFX folder. Now to get this to work, we need to go into our history state. And right now, we've got audio data, which is currently capturing all of the audio tracks for our visual novel. So we can capture all the music in place, but we also need to capture the sound effects. So instead of just having this as audio data, what I may do is I may rename this to audio track data. And so now we have a list of audio track data, which means we can create audio sound effects now. So in the data containers, where we have all the audio track data, character data, dialogue data, graphic data for our history, let's go ahead and create a new one, C# script for the audio SFX data. Now let's make sure we put this in the history namespace and serialize the class. And then we really only need one thing. We just need a list of all the sound effects. So we'll have a public list of strings. And so for each sound effect, we're going to want a public string for the sound effect path, so the file path. And then we also want the volume and the pitch. So public float volume and public float pitch, as well as any other settings you might want to record for your sound effects. I'm not going to record loop here because the only sound effects I'll be recording are ones that are looping. So it wouldn't make sense to have a Boolean in here since those are the only ones that'll be recorded anyway. But let's go ahead and head back to our history state and add this as an option now. In our history state, we have a list of audio track data. So now let's make a public list of audio SFX data and name it SFX. So for SFX data, let's go ahead and give ourselves a capture state. So public static list audio SFX data capture. And in history state, let's say that state.sfx equals audio SFX data.capture. And then we need a apply state. So let's go ahead and make public. Am I operating that off the class? Yep, sure am. Okay, so public static void apply, which needs to take in the audio SFX data that it's using, which is actually a list of audio SFX. And that'll be data, or I'll call it SFX. So the history state will capture it, and then when we load it, we're going to say audio SFX data dot apply SFX. So we essentially capture all the sound effect data and we reapply it using what is saved in the history state. As for how we do this, we're going to go ahead and make it where we grab all of the sound effects from the audio manager and then figure out from their name the file path that they were using for this particular file, as well as the volume and the pitch from the audio source that is attached to them. So in the audio manager, we can stop all sound effects by getting all the sources. I'm going to go ahead and copy this line, and I'm going to make it a field that we can grab from elsewhere. So I'm going to make this a public, and this will be a audio source array, all SFX. And then this is simply going to point to that value, SFX root dot get components and children audio source. So audio SFX data can grab a list of audio sources. SFX equals, we will grab this from the audio manager, grab it from the instance, and say get or all SFX. So we'll grab all the SFX, and then we have a list of everything that we need. So for each var sound in SFX, let's go ahead and get the information. So we can say that we're going to have a new audio SFX data data equals new audio SFX data. So data.volume equals sound.volume, data.pitch equals sound.pitch, and then data.filepath equals some sort of value. We need to get it from the name of the object. So we could grab it from, well, let's make a function in the audio manager to extract the name from the sound effect. So we know that this is our naming format, which means we need to split our sound effect name by these brackets to get what is inside. Now, just in case we do something different or we decide to change this name format in the future, let's go ahead and define what the containers will be. So we can say public static read-only string array, which would be the SFX name format containers. This will equal a new string array with 2 values, which will be our containing brackets. So the first one's going to be the open bracket, and the next one's going to be the closed bracket. And then we can go ahead and do a static string for the SFX name format, which is going to use these containers. So what we can do is we can change this into 3 different parts. So we'll have one string plus this little format section. And then we're just going to sandwich it in between these brackets. So we can now proceed these 2 on the end with the ability to inject these values directly from the SFX name format containers 0 and SFX name format containers 1. So we still get the squiggles 0, so we can use string.format and inject the name in there, but we're replacing the actual containers with whatever may be in the format containers array down here. So if we wanted to change this in the future, we could very well do that, and it wouldn't affect any of the logic. Now, knowing that, we can go ahead and extract the name. So string name or resources path equals sound dot. Let's go ahead and get the game object dot name, and we're going to split it by some symbols. Which, as I think about it, let's go to the audio manager and change this from string to a character array, and just make sure that these are characters instead, because it's easier to split by characters than by strings. So let's go ahead and get the splitters here. So we can specify audio manager dot SFX name format containers, and then we're going to select the first one. So it would be inside of the brackets. The index 0 would be just the formatter on the left side, and index 2 would be the ending container on the right side, but 1 would be the name in between. So we can get the resources path directly from there. And then we'll go ahead and say file path equals resources path. And then, once we're done with that, we can add it to a list. So let's go ahead and initialize a list. So list audio SFX data, and this will be audio list equals new list audio SFX data, and then audio list dot add, and we're going to add the data. But I need to do that inside of the for loop. I need to do that right in here after we've compiled all the data, and then we just return audio list. So this should go ahead and capture all the data for the looping sound effects for us, as long as we make sure that they are looping. So if sound.loop, if we are not looping, then we'll continue on to the next one and do nothing. But if it is a looping sound, then we gather all the data and we append that to the list and we return that. Now, if we want to apply it, let's go ahead and try to take all of the sound effects from this data and then play them again. So let's go ahead for each bar sound in SFX. then let's go ahead and call the audio manager to play the sound effect. We can do this by calling audiomanager.instance.playSoundEffect, and then we're going to pass in the sound.file path. The mixer we're going to just leave as null, so it will go ahead and do its default. Volume is going to equal sound.volume, and pitch is going to equal sound.pitch, and loop is going to equal true, because it would only have been a looping sound. Now, if you try to open up Unity, you may get a null reference exception without even starting the game, and if we look at the audio manager, that's because it's coming from our static assignment here. So the problem is that we just need to switch the order of these two since they are both static. SFX name format is being initialized before the containers, and it's trying to access the containers before they're actually initialized. So we just switch the order of those two, and then we're good to go. I'm also going to come into the v-in-game save and change encrypt to false just so we can see the sound effects saving. And now, being that we've changed the history states, we do need to delete the old history state files. Otherwise, they won't reload correctly. So we can go ahead and restart, and then try out this new save, which includes the sound effects now. So my load menu should be empty. We'll go ahead and start a new game. And right off the bat, we can see Audio Church Bells Far is playing, so I can save here. And then I'll continue forward, and I'll get to where we play the static. There we are. So I'll go ahead and save at the static now, and return home. So all the sound effects you can see are gone. They are no longer in the sound effects object. So let's go ahead and load, and I'm going to go ahead and load the church bells part. There we go. So it saved it, and it loaded up the audio church bells. So if I go ahead and refresh this, and take a look at this file, we can see it's able to reload it because in sound effects, we now have a file called audio/churchbellsfar with volume 1 and pitch 1, and it's able to reload that sound effect. Now let's go ahead and load the next one. So let's load the one that had the static. So there we are. We see we have static, but interestingly enough, we have church bells twice. We're now loading up church bells twice, so let me actually go back and load number 2 again. And yeah, we are duplicating sounds. So we're not really checking for sounds if they exist first. Which makes sense in one way, because you might want to layer sound effects. You may want to use sound effects, and you may not want it limited to one per type of sound. You may want to do different ones and just change their audio. Maybe you could change their positions and whatnot. But when we go to reload from a save, we do need to make sure that those sounds are not currently playing. Because then we're not just playing a new sound, we're trying to reload a sound, and that sound may already be there, so we need to check for it. So similarly to how we stop a sound effect by searching through the sounds, we're basically going to do the same thing and create a new function called checking, we're going to check if a sound is playing. So it'll be a function called isPlayingSound. So a public Boolean returning function called isPlayingSFX, taking in a string for the sound name. Or is playing. So we'll make this a public Boolean returning function called isPlayingSoundEffect, taking in a string for the sound name as the parameter. And then we'll go ahead and pay. And then we'll go ahead and paste in that code that we copied, which just searches through the array, finds one that matches, only we're not going to return, we're not going to destroy it rather, we're going to return true if we find it. Otherwise, we're going to return false. And so in SFX data, for each one, let's go ahead and check if we are playing that sound or not. And let's do a quick check. If not audio manager.instance is playing sound effect, and let's pass in the sound.file path. Only problem with that is this is the file path and not the name that would actually be associated with the clip. So we have a choice. We can either add the clip name to the sound effects that's saved to the history state, or we can check the name using this format and just inject the file path that's received and see if it matches. So we could do something like or string.format sfx name format followed by the sound name equals whatever this source's name is, source.gameObject.name. So in this case, we can either check if the clip matches or the name matches. Now that is a little extra processing that we do, so if we don't want to do it that way, then we can go ahead and save the actual clip name to the history state as well. So we can have the file path, and we can have a public string for file name, and data.file name equals sound.clip.name. And when we go to try to replay this, if it's not playing the sound effect file name, then we try to play the sound effect at that path, which will ultimately result in that a clip by that name being played, as long as it exists. And doing that will allow us to reload without triggering the same sounds twice. So let me go ahead and load this one, which was earlier giving us 2 bells. Now we are not doing that because we're monitoring the sounds that are being played. But let's say that we try to go back. Let's say that we just go back through our history state, and our sound effect is still playing. So we need to make sure that that sound stops. Any sounds that are not supposed to be active in another history state should be stopped. So let's make sure that happens. So we can ensure this happens by keeping a cache. Let's do a list of clip names, which will be our cache, and set that equal to a new list. For every sound, we're going to add the sound.file name, since that will be the clip name. We're going to add the sound file name to the cache. And then at the very end, for each var, let's go source in audio manager.instance.all sfx for each sound effect that is playing. If not cache.contains the source.clip.name, then we know we need to stop it. So audio manager.instance.stop sound effect by the source.clip. We could do the name or the clip. I'm just going to go ahead and do the clip there. So we'll go ahead and stop every one that should not actually be active. And then if I go ahead and load up the first one with just the audio bells, we get the bells, and I should be able to load up second file. So we get the bells, and we get the static. And if I go back, all we have are the bells that are running. Go back in. Now we got static bells. Looks good. And we go back home.